seeing us on Facebook, where it's the first and third Tuesday of every month. And for the next few, we are, after we stop going live, we are doing an in-depth look at the Constitution. And we'll be sending some links out that can be beneficial to you as well. But it's a good conversation. It's amazing just reading a little bit of the Constitution, you realize, man, we're a long way from where this document wants us to be. But it's important to know and to be able to articulate arguments whenever people are trying to subvert the Constitution. So we are doing that, but we are going to start, 15 minutes, kind of do some of the same things that we normally do, look at what's going on in culture, and then look at it through a biblical framework, a biblical worldview. How do we handle these things? And one of the things that I've done in here, and I know that everyone that comes here, that you know this, that we are in a different time, right? Like it's a heightened spiritual battle going on. There is something a little bit different, right? You can find any time in history, you can find, there's sinfulness going on, there's problems going on, issues in society that are happening, but we really have kind of reached a heightened state of that. And one of the passages that I've used a lot is Romans chapter 1. What Romans chapter 1 kind of explains, if you will, or portrays is what happens when a society kind of completely turns their back on God, right, and starts pursuing other things. It leads down a very dark path. There's a lot of Christians right now who are questioning and wondering, are we in the end times? Well, none of us know, right? We have no idea. We could be, but there's been a lot of times throughout history that people have felt we're maybe in the end times. To me, that's not the right question because we have no way to really know that answer. One thing that I do know for sure is that Romans chapter 1 is not talking about the end times. It's talking about what can happen now to a society who has turned its back on God. So I don't know if we're in the end times. I know we are in a Romans chapter 1 time. So we need to make sure we're viewing the world understanding where we are. And one of the things that I do on occasion is kind of just show proof that we're in a Romans chapter 1 time. I know you understand that here, but there's a lot of people who are really content just to have their head in the sand, just to pretend that everything is going along just fine. But I think, and we also need to constantly be checking ourselves to make sure we're not overreacting, make sure we're not blowing things out of proportion, right? We want to be careful with that. So it's always important for us to kind of look at what's going on in our culture so that we can assess where we are. So I'm going to read through Romans chapter 1 today, and then I have a few examples that I believe are supportive of the fact that we are still definitely in a Romans 1 situation in our society. So you get down to Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18. It says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." So I want to stop there. So one of the things that we see, and we see this in a couple of places, I could have put these examples at either place, but one thing that really jumped out to me is those who suppress the truth by their wickedness, right? So it goes all the way back again to the Garden of Eden. What was the temptation? Did God really say? What in essence was that? Well, is that really true, what God said? Did God really say? Well, we are clearly in a time where the majority of our society believes that there's not an absolute truth, or that truth is always subjective, right? So that's a problem in itself. But we see it on a very practical level as well. We see the truth kind of being manipulated either overtly or subvertly. And I've always tried to make the case. I understand, like in politics, there's always kind of the little white lies, right, to try to move agendas. And I don't think that's good, but you're always going to have that. That's different than just blatant, outright lies whenever we start living that way. And we're clearly there. And one of the things that happened, this was a horrible story in Las Vegas about two kids that stole a car, and then they're driving, and all of this is videoed. You can hear them talking, and they see a guy walking, an older gentleman walking on the road, and they run him over. And they find the car later, and then they've already stolen another car. It's just horrible. And they basically were just mocking the whole thing. The main kid that was driving and was, I think he's just now turning 18. The other kid was like 14 or 15 that was doing the filming. But the kid has been in juvie before. He actually told the cops while he was there that I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist for this. Just some of the things that are circulating that are, the mindset here is quite incredible. That says enough about where our society is. But again, you're always going to have, sin is sin. So any society is going to have things like that. One thing that I thought was very interesting, the gentleman who was hit was a former police officer. The headlines were kind of interesting to make it sound like it was just an accidental hit and run, when actually it was just flat out murder. But then one thing that really jumped out, and I always am careful, or I try to be, because I know that whether you're left wing or right wing, when something starts to fit your narrative, it's easy just to go with it, right? Oh, I like hearing that, so I'm going to go with it. But this was actually from MSNBC, which, if you don't know, they are left-leaning to be nice, right? They're not a right-leaning organization. So this is the 18-year-old kid that was behind the wheel. Again, he's the one that is being charged. We don't know how this is going to work out, but he has been booked. In the booking documents, this is how his race is classified. His name is Jesus Ayala, and under race, he is white. Now, why do I bring that up? Because that's not true, right? What you're doing is you're making sure that you can keep your narrative going, right? And one of the narratives, we don't want to attribute crime in any kind of a higher percentage to minority groups, right? Well, what's a really good way to do that is to classify obvious minorities as white. And so when this just comes up as a statistic, this is going to say this number of white people committed hit and runs, right? Now, again, we've got to be careful how we do this. Did he do this because he was Hispanic? Obviously not. He did this because he was a criminal, right? I don't care what color he is, but this is whenever, that passage, it says, those who try to suppress the truth, right? So there's some truth here. This is the guy. He did do it. But we don't want the full truth out there. What does that do to a society? Well, it's dangerous. And Romans chapter 1 continues on. It says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings, birds, animals, and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie. They worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. All right, so what is it saying? Because you start to turn away from God, God gives you over to a depraved mind, right? Like that's the wrath of God is that he lets us experience the consequences of complete sinfulness, right? Like that's a lot of what it is. And there was a part in there that though they knew God, they didn't glorify him any longer. So they changed. They went from knowing God to now not caring about what God has said. And that all of that leads to a different way that society functions. Specifically, sexuality and the relationship between men and women starts to be messed up, right? And that's always an evidence of a society that's headed in a wrong direction, is when the sexual norms start going south. That's a bad sign. Well, there's a church in Texas. It's up in the DFW area. I think it's Galileo Church. This is the first picture on their website. And so they clearly, we believe God through Christ has welcomed all to God's hearts, period. We want our society to reflect that. So we rally in Dallas, Austin, Parade, Fort Worth, whatever. We actually think God means for us to change the world. Ongoing justice work through social media, trying to keep a world that can be suddenly and seriously hostile to LGBTQ plus beloved. So that's clearly their desire, right? That's what they want to do, but they do it in the name of God, right? So is this an example of those who knew God now forgetting who God was, and then it leads to a depraved mind? So this is one level. This is the most recent thing. They have actually created an organization using their 501c3 called Transportation. It says the North Texas Transportation Network provides travel grants to North Texas families seeking out-of-state health care for trans and gender-diverse minors. Galileo Church has its first missional priority to do justice for LGBTQ people and support the people who love them. Galileo Church holds the 501c through this ministry. It's a non-religious organization requiring no religious participation or belief by applicants, their families, donors, or steering committee members. What this is, and I love the language that is used, they will provide transportation to out-of-state clinics to minors to either have hormone replacement, which is way too early for us to know the long-term impacts. Well, it's not. We know the long-term impacts are bad. It definitely doesn't show us that they are positive. But what no one ever says is it also is providing transportation for a 14-year-old to have their perfectly healthy breast cut off. Right? That is what that means. That is what that care is. Now, not for everyone who struggles with that, but for many it is, and especially as it's becoming popular and becoming pushed. And now you're doing this in the name of God. Right? This clearly is a Romans 1 situation. And then we have the last part of Romans chapter 1. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they do what not have been done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. I love that one. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. although they knew God's the righteous decree, that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. So it becomes not only do we recognize, okay, yeah, that's wrong, but we move from that's wrong, no, that's okay, to we actually approve of the action. It's kind of like you used to be able to find no nude women on magazines. Then you could find nude women on magazines, but the magazine was covered up and kind of hidden, and you had to work to get it. Now you can find it in 2 seconds online, and it's everywhere. And in fact, many will claim that it's a good thing. That's part of the sexual revolution, right? But that last part, when it says, approve of those who do such things. One thing jumped out to me, if you've been paying attention, this is in the political world. The senator from California passed away, Dianne Feinstein. Our prayers go to her family, but she was 90. You're kind of expect at some point we are all going to die, if you breaking news. But she was very liberal, obviously. She was there forever. So now the governor can appoint someone in her place, right? So the California governor, obviously, it's going to be somebody that I wouldn't agree with, right? But I thought it was interesting. They approved a lady by the name of LaFonza Butler because he said he would put someone in who was a black woman, which I used to think that, if your starting point was the color of someone's skin, that was a bad thing. Not anymore. It's a good thing because we're in a Romans 1 world, right? But there's something interesting that jumped out to me about this woman. She's obviously very politically connected, has been connected with Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, things like that. None of that surprised me at all. But where she has been working for the last couple years is a place called Emily's List. Emily's List is a organization that has this as their main point. We recruit, train, and support Democratic pro-choice women running for office up and down the ballot because in office these women can change the world. So they are intentionally seeking out people their foundational principle is killing babies. That's what this organization does. And they use the term pro-choice, but we want to allow women to kill their children for any reason. And that's the goal of this organization. She was running this organization. So now we have gone from not just where abortion is safe, legal, and rare, so we kind of are like, maybe it needs to happen, but we really want to be careful here, to we approve of those who believe in the evil that we are fighting against, right? That is the situation that we're in. That's the place that we're in. But you know what? None of that surprises God. God knew that we would be in this place. He knows that societies go through this. And so our role is to, one, recognize where we are, and then try to bring God's goodness and his faithfulness and his righteousness into the world. I don't know if we're going to win on a human level. I know that God always wins, and that God will make everything right in the end, and that is where we put our hope. But that is also why we continue to push back against some of this stuff. We can't just sit here, throw our hands up, put our head in the sand and say, you know what, I don't care anymore. It's too bad. I can't do anything about it. No, we can at least look at this stuff and say, no, that's wrong, and that is evil, and that is not godly, and we're not going to stand up and support that in any way. All right, well, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll be back in 2 weeks on our third Tuesday of the month. We'll see